Josh, I'm so excited to talk with you today. You directed one of my all-time favorite documentaries, and you are possibly, and I would say actually probably, the greatest Kansas Jayhawk fan ever. For example, when you took your wife to Lawrence, Kansas for the first time, you took her to the basketball arena, not to a game, but just to the empty arena. But that's just the beginning. Several years ago, you decided you wanted to win the rules of basketball at auction and bring them back to Lawrence, Kansas. How did you ever get that idea?
It was pretty organic. I was back then, people read the paper and I was reading the New York Times, and there was an article about the rules of basketball, the original rules of basketball coming up for auction at Sotheby's, which is a iconic auction house here in New York where I live. And it actually happens to only be 10 blocks from my house. So going down there was pretty easy for me. And once I went down there, they had a preview, as they often do with high profile auctions. Once I actually walked into Sotheby's and saw the display and sort of backed up and kind of took stock in how important this document was, I started to formulate a plan.
So, in this documentary that I hope everybody goes and watches after this interview, if they haven't seen it already, which many people listening will have already seen it, uh, you say you felt a little bit like Moses.
Yeah, I'm kind of a ridiculous person, and so especially back then. And I think I had a lot of fun with like the absurdity, the religious comparisons, just like I'm doing this for my people. No one outside of kind of Jayhawk Nation probably understands how much pride we take in the history of Kansas basketball. In Kansas City, in Kansas, in Lawrence especially, people very much get that. And so I kind of didn't care about anyone but those folks. These are my people and I want to do this for them. So that's kind of where the Moses comparison comes in.
And how much time did you have? Like this isn't, so you want to get this done,
Yeah.
but it's not like you've got 6 months or a year to make this happen.
No, so from the moment I read the article, it was a little less than 6 weeks, but I didn't actually get out into the world and start traveling to get in front of people till about a little less than 4 weeks before the auction.
Yeah, incredible. So, what inside you made you believe that you can get this done? Especially, we're looking at like 4 weeks.
You know, um, I'm not so sure that I thought about the end result so much. I think that I had this passion to try and get people excited about what I was excited about. And I didn't think there was any harm in trying to share my enthusiasm with folks. It seemed like a really unbelievable opportunity um, to not miss for the history of Kansas and just knowing what this could mean, long term. I definitely saw that this was bigger than this month or bigger than what I'm trying to do. This could really impact our program for a really long time. And I just thought, gosh, if I can get out there and be as crazy passionate as possible, you never know. You never know what might happen. And I think a lot of times when you just take that first step, good things tend to happen for you.
And at the time, did you have any sense for what the rules would sell for?
I had no clue. You could have told me. I mean, I thought they'd go for a lot, because it's after all the original rules of basketball. So I was certain. I think we all were very sure it would be a seven-figure sum. But could it have been 2 million? Could it have been 7 million? Nothing would have shocked me, quite frankly.
Yeah. What I love about this whole story is, many fans, we all feel like we help the team, we cheer and we pay tickets and maybe you're part of the booster club. But your vision and your ability to see the big picture of like, you get the original rules of basketball to Kansas, to where James Naismith started the first basketball program here at Kansas. What does that do long term? Well, that is the most iconic thing every recruit that comes to Kansas could ever hope to see. And now they're there in Kansas. And so and that's why, I call you, let's just call you the greatest fan in Kansas basketball history, because you're actually making an impact. And while we're talking about this, let's just congratulate you in part for the recent national championship as well. Let's continue with being ridiculous and over the top, but not entirely.
Yeah, I mean, look, the truth is what makes Kansas basketball great, outside of great players and great coaches, is a great fan base, right? So, people who show up every game and go nuts and cheer on the team are impacting the success of the program, obviously. I suppose you could say I took it a step further by saying, you know what, I'll be the one to lead this charge, and I'll be kind of ridiculous doing so. Like, sometimes I think people are afraid that they're going to look a certain way when doing something, and that stops them from doing it. And I guess in this particular case, I was like, you know what, I'll be that guy, just because I feel so passionate. I mean, it really just was about my love of Kansas basketball and the history. Like, the rules, to me, yeah, it's a great thing for recruits who come visit the school, but it's also, it's like bringing the Naismith story full circle. And I'm a storyteller. I love storytelling, and it not only puts a period on the end of the Naismith sentence, metaphorically speaking, but it also continues that story.
Yeah.
And so, he's not just buried in Lawrence. We have his rules there, and he's intertwined, and his incredible contribution to the world, kind of the heart of it beats from the University of Kansas now and forever.
For those people listening who maybe don't understand all of the ties to Lawrence, Kansas, James Naismith, the beginning of basketball, can you just kind of summarize some of those connections?
Yeah, absolutely. Naismith invented basketball in December of 1891. Um, about 7 years later, he was hired by the University of Kansas to be they're essentially head up the athletic department, of which there really wasn't one at the time, but also to be the head chaplain, the one to lead, prayer at the school. And those were his two roles. When he got to KU, there was no basketball program. Here's the inventor. He thought, well, I'm going to start a program. And that's what he did. And so in 1898, KU fielded their first team with Naismith as a coach. And very soon thereafter, one of his young players, Fog Allen, played under Naismith, but then really went on to take the ball, metaphorically speaking, from Dr. Naismith and create, this unbelievable program at KU.
Okay, so getting back to the rules and the auction. So you got 4 weeks. You want to get him to KU. What's your strategy?
Well, my strategy was, this is really before social media. I mean, social media existed certainly in 2010, but it wasn't as, you know, part of everyday life back then as it is today. So it was not really about social media. My game plan was, hey, who can really write a big check? Who can make a difference here, and who's shown a track record of placing Kansas basketball at the top of their giving list, right? And once you ask those questions from a target perspective, you're able to narrow it down to a few folks, which is certainly no guarantee that you can get in front of those people or that they want to pitch in. When I began, I thought that perhaps we could put together a consortium of people, some of these top level boosters who love KU. They'll come in together, they'll pool some money, and we'll show up to the auction and give it our best shot, right? Like, that was kind of the goal. And I got in front of a lot of those folks, and they were all incredible people who've done unbelievable, amazing things for KU. At the end of the day, though, I think David Booth, understood, like me, what was at stake. He really, I think, was very quickly able to realize this is a chance. If this, never mind this crazy guy in front of me being me, like, forget him and forget the documentary, all that stuff. This is really important. And so after a lot of kind of back and forth and running around and me trying to get people to kind of suggest why it was so important, I think at the end of the day, once the smoke cleared, this guy just simply on his own made a decision. And it's a decision that we all should be indebted, or we all are indebted to and for, for the rest of time, really.
So I one thing I love about the way you went about this is you show up at some of these donors, so Dana Anderson,
Yeah.
and you show up at his house and you're like, hey, we're doing a documentary on
Right.
trying to get the rules of basketball.
Yeah.
How did that idea hit you? Because if you show up and you say, hey, can I have, several $1 million for the rules, that's a way harder sell than, hey, we're doing a documentary, or at least it just feels so much more
Totally.
reasonable.
Look, I think it's like at the end of the day, I wasn't there to put anyone on the spot or do something for my own sake. It was all for the program. And in my mind, I was able to justify that mean to that end, the end of
Yeah.
that mean, or the means to that end, right? Um, and so, yes, I did enter into these conversations with a bit of a, not being fully transparent. And, I there's part of me that felt guilty about that, and still does. I think that, being having a strong kind of, moral uh, fiber to you is really important in the world. And so it just felt like my only chance. And at the end of the day, I had to kind of raise or kind of weigh the pros and cons of that approach. And I think at the end of the day, it was the right call.
One of the phrases I like is, it's important to be clever, but you don't want to be too clever, right? And one of my favorite moments of the documentary is you're visiting with Stuart Haresh. And, you talk about, you're doing the documentary, you're trying to raise the money. And Stuart says, well, this is cool. My wife likes to donate to like children's causes.
Right.
But so funny. But you're on a mission. Yeah, you meet with David Booth. Okay, so one of the great Kansas donors, grew up in Lawrence, Kansas. The Chicago Business School is named after Booth. Of course, the Kansas football stadium is named after Booth. Uh, and he's excited about it, but then he kind of maybe loses some excitement. And I can't remember if it was before that or in between when you started meeting with other people like Larry Brown and Roy Williams. Like, at what point did you think that it would be important to get in front of them, and then also with Mark Allen as well?
Totally. So I think one of the great lessons to take from this project is that sometimes you need people to help you get your message across. It's good to have passion, and it's good to have a really clean, direct message and goal. But I felt in this instance that if I could get some of these KU legends to sort of back up what I saw and how important I thought this was, that would do a lot of the work for me, because hey, these guys are Hall of Famers. They're really important people to the history of Kansas basketball. And the other thing that I thought was, I just need to make as much noise as possible. How do I spread the word out there about what I'm doing? Because like I said, social media wasn't much of an avenue to do that yet. And when I got to Kansas City, I hit up the local newspaper. They did a quick little hit on me. A local sports radio show, gentleman who's no longer on the air there, said, hey, why don't you come on our show and tell folks in Kansas City what you're doing? I said, yeah, please help me. I want to get the word out here. I go on that show, and Lou Allen, the wife of Dr. Mark Allen, hears me on this radio show, sends me an email. I immediately show up to her house, because who better than the Allen family to sort of get behind what I'm doing?
Fog Allen's descendant.
Exactly. Fog Allen's grandson. They're totally on board. They believe in the cause. And at some point, basically what happened is, I got the sense that David wasn't as gung-ho, because there were some questions circulating about, you know, copies of the rules and these
Mhm.
photostatic copies that Fogg had made years prior that had come up at other auction houses. And there was just a lot of, um, a lack of clarity around the situation. So it was getting the Allen family involved. It was getting some of those KU legends involved. And it was also going back to Sotheby's and sitting down with the two chief auction experts, Leela Dunbar and Selby Kiefer, and me really, and them being fully uh, agreeable to do this on video and tell me why these are, without question, the rules that hung in the gym the day Naismith invented basketball. After all, it is Sotheby's, they have a long track record. So doing all of those things kind of started to answer some of the questions that I think David had. And it was really, a critical piece to the puzzle.
And I think getting the legendary coaches, Larry Brown and Roy Williams, on camera talking about KU basketball, where they had both had such great legendary careers. So, with the help of Sotheby's and the Allens, basically you get Bill Self's endorsement.
That's right. This came, just prior to the auction because KU didn't have an athletic director at the time. So, from an access standpoint, I couldn't get the coach. And once Dr. Mark Allen got involved, he was able to get the coach Self. And then Coach Self and Booth spoke. And I think that was really the icing on the cake. Once we had Coach Self backing up everything everyone else said, I think that lit a fire under David that was basically undeniable.
Okay, so you get to the auction and the bidding starts. Do you remember roughly kind of where the bidding started and how you're feeling and what that moment is like?
So this is where my memory isn't great because I actually haven't watched it since it came out on television all those years ago. But it really quickly jumped up past, $1 million. I mean, very quickly we were into the $1.5 million range, if I'm not mistaken. And I just remember being in that room, unable, like, it was so nerve-wracking, and me not having a sense of kind of where Mr. Booth was willing to go with it all. And that's even, I think, more nerve-wracking because you have no control over the situation. However, once he kind of started going, you kind of get a little bit more confidence because the sense is, well, he's in this to win. And having said that, it was still grueling. I mean, I've never experienced anything. I've been in the room when my kids are born. That doesn't, that pales in comparison to this, right? And it was just like an out of body experience, the likes of which I've never had before or since. It was unbelievable, truly unbelievable.
The documentary captures your emotion and you can see your face, and the bidding now it's past 2 million and 3 million, and you just can't even watch. You're covering your face. And we find out after the fact that the competitor is Rubenstein, David
Right.
Rubenstein, a Duke fan.
That's right.
I mean,
Right.
could you imagine if you would have lost out to Duke?
No, and the crazy thing is, when we sat down with David Rubenstein after David Booth had won, he said that he could sense the other person really wanted to win this, and at some point, it was getting a little to be a little too much for him. But so he was going to house them at Duke, but then his plan was to have them, I think, tour, go around the country, perhaps the world, and live in some other places so people could go and visit them. At least, that's what he said in person. But no, I mean, to answer your question, it's kind of like it would have just been absolutely devastating. I mean, I think we all would have moved on. And it's like, oh, okay, here comes a rich Duke guy kind of trying to claim, they sort of invented basketball, so to speak, and we all would have rolled our eyes, and I would have been hugely, enormously devastated. But it didn't, luckily it didn't, we didn't live to see that.
One of my favorite moments of the documentary, I believe you're in Cameron Indoor, and you say something like, God, everybody hates Duke or something like that. I can't remember the exact language, but
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, the crazy thing is, like, that's all, like, we caught wind of some Duke interest, although you heard that about a lot of different possible parties leading up to the auction. When I went to visit Roy Williams in Chapel Hill, after the interview, we thought, well, let's just mosey on down the road to Cameron Indoor. We walked in and kind of checked it out. And that's where we filmed that scene. Yeah, I mean, Duke, like, became in the 90s, right? Like, and a lot of it's due to their success. This sort of the team you love to hate. And to lose to them in terms of something that speaks to our heritage and our legacy, it would have been, for me, unfathomable.
So in the documentary, again, you're covering your face. The bidding is going up and up and up, and now it's up to 3.8 million.
Yeah.
And what happens?
I'll
let you tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, I got to give David so much credit from a suspense and a storytelling standpoint. His willingness to hang in there, be cool, calm, collected, and not feel pressured by the auctioneer, the liaison on the phone, and just do what he wanted to do. I think was unbelievable to listen to, and eventually to bear witness to, because I wasn't watching at the time. He just he did what he felt he had to do, and at 3.8, he puts that final bid in. We win, and with the buyer's premium, it's worth noting that brought the total amount up to, I believe, 4.3 and change, which is unbelievable. I mean, when you stop to think about it. And it was just, gosh, it really felt like winning a national championship. It was that sense of elation. That's really the only thing I can compare it to.
And being down, it's like you're down 20 at half, and then coming back to win, and then and you and David hug.
Yeah, I think I hugged him twice. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to. There's not a whole lot you can do in a situation like that to show your gratitude, I guess, other than hug. And I think, these crazy circumstances brought us together in that room at that moment, and yeah, it's just something I'll never forget. I mean, it's an unbelievable story, and it's all true. And yeah, I think those things kind of line up very infrequently in this world, but it does go to show. I mean, this stuff sounds cliche, but, like, if you really truly feel so strongly about something in your bones, and you're willing to just, like, put one foot after the next, you never know what might happen. It's just such a reminder of that.
Yeah, it's so inspiring. And I was going to ask you, if there are any other kind of lessons you wanted to pass along, and you've already shared a couple, but as you know, the theme of this podcast is, simple, practical, underappreciated lessons. So as we wrap up, is there anything else that comes to mind in terms of lessons you've learned that are simple, practical, underappreciated that you'd most like to pass along to others?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times people put pressure on themselves in these situations, or in situations where maybe they want to start a business or be an entrepreneur, or anything maybe that there's some fear, where fear plays a role. And I do this too, where you feel like you have to be perfect. And I think one thing that going through that showed me is it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to have fear. The most important thing is to show up. And that has that has played true for me time and time again in my life. And it's a really simple idea, but I think it stops a lot of people from going after their own rules, you know? And so I'd just like to say, like, go after your own rules, whatever those are. And you don't need to be, you know, anything other than yourself. And it's okay not to have all the answers. Just give it a shot, you know?
Well, the reason the documentary is one of my all-time favorites is because I feel like that message comes across. Like it is so inspiring. I mean, it's suspenseful, it's hilarious. My wife and I were just laughing out loud all throughout. You know, you're just such an incredible character throughout the documentary. You get a real sense of who you are. You know, you're vulnerable. Like you're showing yourself, you know, when one of the potential suitors says no, you talk about, you know, you go to the Raiders of the Lost Ark reference. And so your personality comes through. Of course, like I said, it's suspenseful, it's moving. The documentary is titled No Place Like Home. So I hope everybody goes and watches it just to really appreciate how amazing that story is. And then, you know, I think it just demonstrates that lesson that you shared so well. So I'm just so grateful I got to chat with you today. Josh Swade, the greatest fan in the history of Kansas basketball.
I don't know about that, but I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It was great.